All right, so in this video, I'm going to talk about the essay Putting Civility in Its Place by Sigal Ben-Porath, who basically argues for an inclusive freedom framework. So classrooms can be open, intellectual environments for engaging in controversial topics and having open discussions. The author poses the question first, though, why do students come to college in the first place? And so it's basically to learn, it's to understand, it's to grow intellectually. And because of this, then the classroom should be an environment that is conducive for students where they can learn, where they can seek the truth, where they can engage in conversations that they may not be able to engage in the real world or outside of the classroom. And so she does talk about the idea of free speech and how it should be responded to differently inside of the classroom versus outside of the classroom. But the main focus of the essay is what happens inside of the classroom. Of course, there are 10 situations that can happen inside of the classroom in our day and age, especially with political polarization. And so, what does one do? What does a professor do in this case? And so, she's working under or with an inclusive freedom framework where the student who is saying something controversial or offensive shouldn't necessarily be shot down, but it should be a learning opportunity that is managed, of course, but also at the same time encouraged. So that student and all of the other students are learning from this situation. And so this is based off of the idea of academic freedom, which is a very important concept in the classroom because it protects students and professors under the First Amendment, where professors in general, right, within a certain framework, can teach what they want to teach in the way that they deem is the best for students. And students can also ask questions and discuss topics in a way that is conducive for their learning. And so for a government to ban or intervene with what is talked about in the classroom, right, that would be extremely problematic because not only would it violate this First Amendment idea, but it also violates the notion of academic freedom and the reason why colleges exist in the first place, or the reason why students come to college in the first place. And so professors should be guided by two main ideas, right? Intellectual ideas, where they are creating an environment where students can learn and understand new ideas, but also civic ideas, right? So preparing students for the real world, preparing students for their roles and existence in society, right, outside of the classroom. And so the government then shouldn't be censoring what is taught because that violates this notion of intellectual virtue or civic virtue. And so, of course, in our day and age, the issue of very perhaps extreme political views or political views that are on seemingly opposite sides of the spectrum, right, with political polarization, it makes it hard for professors, especially for professors who don't have tenure, who don't necessarily have that job security to engage with it because they don't necessarily want to disturb or upset students, right? And it is very easy for people to be upset. So, how does one deal with these situations? And so, the author says that we should be intellectually honest. We, as in professors, should be intellectually honest with what we teach and how we teach it and be transparent with our students. And we need to engage in that promotion of academic freedom for our students and ourselves as well. But at the same time, there should be, of course, some management, there should be rules. And she explores the idea of trigger warnings, right? So these are warnings or a statement that is made before a certain unit or concept is talked about that is meant to warn students ahead of time and say, all right, if this topic, such as sexual violence, for example, is troubling to you or re traumatizing to you, then it's okay for you to leave the classroom, or you can do an assignment on a different topic if it's going to be very upsetting and difficult for you. And so the author talks about how there's been controversy around trigger warnings because there's a notion of how it violates it's the existence of trigger warnings can violate academic freedom and the free flow of ideas in the classroom. But at the same time, she says it's a good exercise of pedagogy because you're still discussing challenging ideas, right? But you're managing it. You're providing a warning ahead of time for students. And so there have also been civil rules that have been created in the classroom, such as ground rules or like classroom norms. And so the author says that these ground rules or classroom norms for discussion seem a bit more surface level. They don't really deeply or effectively manage these difficult conversations. She also says that they are meant to prevent explicit racist and sexist declarations made, for example, by other students, but it's not really done in a way that is where people really understand why it's bad for them to say such things. And there's also the concern of, okay, what's viewed as appropriate versus inappropriate? And so, who is mandating that? Who is determining that? Because this notion of what's appropriate or inappropriate could further perpetuate sexism and racism in the classroom, right? So, if you say to someone, oh, you can't talk about this in an emotional way, right? That could be viewed as problematic. That could be viewed as sexist, for example, since emotions and being emotional has historically been associated with women in a sexist society, for example. So the classroom is not meant to perpetuate what we don't want to have happen in our society as well through having ground rules. The question also comes up with what happens if a student says something where they don't believe in a scientifically valid claim, such as climate change. Maybe they say, I don't believe in climate change. Or maybe they say something where they're violating a general moral claim, such as, I don't agree with gay marriage. How should that be handled in the classroom? And so the author says that when a student makes such comments like this, they should be engaged with. There should be a discussion that happens, at least at first, because these are generally broadly held views in society, even if a lot of people feel strongly about them and feel strongly against them. These are ideas that a good number of people believe in and hold on to. So this can help the other students in the classroom perhaps learn how to talk to people who hold these kinds of views. And it could also be a learning opportunity then for the student who holds these, you know, offensive views about specific realities in our society. Shutting the student down immediately can also violate their autonomy. So it can violate their respect, their dignity, if you just say, you know what, you're wrong, we're going to move on to the next topic. That doesn't really allow for truth seeking and understanding and knowledge. But the author does draw a line between something that could be viewed as offensive versus actual hate speech. And hate speech is written or oral language or words that are used to basically insult, attack, disparage, incite people based off of their membership in a certain social group, such as their gender, race, sexual orientation, religion. And so the author does say it's okay to not continue to talk about these kinds of things when it is hate speech, because that's crossing the line. But what about trying to ask the student, well, why do you believe in this, right? Where is this view coming from? Trying to engage with them before shutting them down, right? Before saying, okay, you're wrong, or not even saying you're wrong, but trying to say, okay, we're going to move on to the next topic. So that's why it is important for there to be classroom norms, because the professor in this situation does hold a privileged and powerful position in the classroom. And so the author says that while it is pretty self-explanatory, that it's okay, it should never be allowed to call upon a student because you think they represent an identity group, right? So she gives the example of a student who is Muslim, or you might think they're Muslim. You shouldn't ask them as a professor, oh, can you speak on this topic because you're Muslim, right? That's singling them out. That's making them feel hypervisible. But you also shouldn't make assumptions about students and their privileges or their views, because even if statistically a majority of students at a university might come from, for example, economically prestigious, well-off backgrounds, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in your classroom is coming from that background. And then you don't want to alienate or isolate the student who doesn't necessarily represent that identity group either. So these are examples of norms and ways of managing identity and differing views in the classroom. And so there shouldn't be legal um, tools or governmental censorship that's enforced in the classroom. It should be pedagogical tools that basically are used to engage and manage with difficult, tense conversations relating to free speech, which she refers to as the inclusive freedom framework. So you're still doing something, but you're not just immediately shutting it down.